gentlemen, time now for our next panel discussion. Please welcome to the stage our panelists. Anna Mascolo, Executive Vice President, Low Carbon Solutions, Shell. Pang Chiang-boon, Chairman, Singapore Economic Development Board. Nadja Hackinson, Member of the Executive Board and Chief Operating Officer of the ThyssenKrupp Decarbon Technologies and Chief Executive Officer, ThyssenKrupp Uhde. Scott Sanderson, Director, Corporate and Strategic Business Development, AWS Energy and Utilities. And your moderator, Ed Crooks, Vice Chair, Americas, Wood Mackenzie.
Well, hello everyone. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us here today. Thank you to the fantastic panel we've got to discuss this subject. I should also personally thank Baker Hughes and Lorenzo for inviting me again to be part of this wonderful event. It really is a great privilege to be here. So this discussion, I think, is an excellent segue on from the previous one that the earlier panel was having, talking about the energy equation and the discussion they had about climate change. We're going to be talking about some practicalities in terms of climate action, in terms of the decarbonization of hard-to-abate sectors. And I guess the obvious question when we start this conversation, and I think a good starting point for us here, is why are we talking about decarbonization? In the sense that given the changes in the policy environment and the way people have been thinking about energy and the priorities that people have had for energy, the changes that have occurred over the past few years, is it still important to be thinking about decarbonization, I guess, is the question. So maybe, Anna, to start with you on that, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I think, look, first of all, thanks for having me here. I think probably Lorenzo said it all at the beginning. We do need a balanced energy transition. We do need to continue in the journey towards decarbonization. Now, it is also true that we are seeing that decarbonization is moving at different pace in different geographies. That's undeniable. And we are adjusting to that, including our own organization. When we look at the future, however, we need to look at it longer term. And this is where we think about scenarios within the Shell setup. So we look at three scenarios. One is looking at AI and surging AI and how that will increase energy demand as well as efficiencies. We look at net zero, and also we look at the one scenario which is very similar to the world we are in today, which is more around trade barriers, every country on its own, and it's a little bit more in isolation, and a slower pace on energy transition. Now, in all of these scenarios, what you're seeing is that you're going to peak on oil within the next 10 years, depending on the scenario. You're going to start seeing an abatement curve for CO2 again in the next 10 years by 2035. Very unlikely that we are on a trajectory to go above 2 or 2.5 degrees. So we are starting to see already progress. Then the other realities are that we are seeing actually gas playing a very prominent role in the decarbonization. This is one area where we feel we would have a competitive advantage. But also we are seeing renewable continuing. We are seeing biofuels, liquids, and biogases. We are seeing carbon removals, like carbon capture and storage. So we are seeing all of these solutions. They will play differently depending on the scenarios, but we probably need all of them to help us, and the pace of the transition will continue to happen.
Thank you very much. So, Chong-boon, I want to come to you in a moment because I want to ask about the role of policy. But perhaps before I do, Nadia, I'll ask you your perspective on this. I mean, yes. One of the things you do is you run a company very specifically focused on decarbonization. Do you talk a little bit about what that means to you? And again, in terms of the sort of that outlook for energy that Anna's just sketched out, where you see ThyssenKrupp fitting into that?
Happy to do so, Ed, and thank you also to Baker Hughes for arranging this. And first of all, the original question of do we need to still talk about decarbonization? Yes, even if net zero and achieving stopping the 1.5 degrees by 2050 is for some not realistic, it doesn't mean that the problem is gone. So we will continue to see droughts, we will continue to see wildfires, we will continue to see the impact of climate change. So we cannot ignore that the problem is still there, although it's clear that the equation, the energy equation that Lorenzo was talking about in his opening still needs to be resolved, and we need to find the balance and the diversification of multiple fuels. So ThyssenKrupp is special in the sense because we're very diverse as a conglomerate. We are in steel, and steel is obviously a hard-to-abate sector. In Germany alone, we contribute around 3% of the greenhouse gas emissions in Germany alone. And that's why the German government has also supported the build-out of the DRI plant in Duisburg. But this is very costly, this is clear, but we still are committed to decarbonizing the steel production, and we know it might take time before we can go from coal straight to green hydrogen, because that's a very high OPEX at this point in time, and the availability is simply not there. But it's a transition. So we want to see the evolution of competitive low carbon and green fuels to support the steel decarbonization, whether that means that we start going from coal to natural gas and slowly increasing to blue hydrogen and green hydrogen in a staggered way. So that's the steel perspective. In decarbon technologies, where I represent also Uhde, where we've built successfully large-scale ammonia plants for the fertilizer industry. Also here, very important, the Minister of Egypt just talked about the fertilizer industry, how important food security along with energy security will be. And also here with the impact of policies that will continue to be firmed up in the coming years. Of course, that's a big challenge to keep fertilizers competitive while addressing and replacing gray hydrogen and the processes with green hydrogen. But we have great examples among those in Egypt where we are doing exactly this. Cement, also a hard-to-abate sector. We're also waiting here for the policies and the incentives for the cement industry to kick in. I'm now talking in a European perspective. But with the right incentives also here, we're offering solutions for carbon capture, oxycombustion, amine-based carbon capture solutions. And carbon capture for sure is something that we will continue to see as an important technology. We're also active in green hydrogen from the perspective of our Nucera team, providing the electrolyzers for some of the biggest projects. 2.2 gigawatt is for the famous NEOM project in Saudi, but we're also active in Anna's project in Shell with the Holland Hydrogen, which I think Anna will cover later. So it's quite a broad portfolio.
Indeed, thank you. Scott, what's your perspective then at AWS when you think about decarbonization?
So AWS, of course, is a cloud company. We were built and designed in order to optimize a very, very complex and large physical network of supply and distribution assets worldwide. For us, digital and optimization come as second nature, and they're only valuable to the extent that they can improve personal productivity on the one hand, or industrial productivity on the other hand. I want to point that out explicitly, because linking the digital to the industrial, as Lorenzo was talking about, the industrial outcomes is really what we're all about. We'll do 20 million optimizations and scenarios a minute when we're managing our throughput through our distribution system. What does that have to do with energy? There's a lot of talk about a gigawatt here and a gigawatt there, new data centers coming online. There are technologies that are available today that still need to be matured and scaled to enhance the productivity of energy-producing assets, electrical assets, renewable assets, and of course the grid-enhancing technologies that can give you an effective 3 to 4 to even 5% improvement in the net capacity of the system. So if you're going to add a small handful of gigawatts of power for an AI data center, that's one thing. If you could deliver the industrial outcome that optimizes 2,500 to 3,000 terawatts of power, the return on that investment is astronomically more than what you would spend on a data center or an NVIDIA chip or a certain optimization. So the promise, and it's long-term, is to optimize that physical system using digital technologies. And that's how we want to deliver those industrial outcomes.
Thank you. Jongbun, then maybe I could bring you in here. So if you could talk a little bit about your perspective from the Singapore Economic Development Board, and also, I mean, in terms of the role of policy and what policy is doing to drive decarbonisation, what do you see that role as being now?
Well, thank you, Ed. I think first and foremost, it's a privilege to be here, my first time attending this meeting, and I would like to thank Lorenzo for inviting me. Before I answer the question, maybe it's useful for me to paint the context in Singapore, and that will tell us how important and how challenging decarbonization is. You know, we are a small island, 700 square kilometer, east to west, about an hour drive, north to south, 45 minutes, 6 million population. GDP is about $500 billion US dollars. Trade is 3 times that, about 1.8 trillion US dollars. We thrive and we have grown because we are able to offer a good place for global companies to operate in. And trade being so important, transportation, connecting Singapore to the rest of the world, whether by air or by sea, is very important. And therefore, like many countries, we set out net zero target by 2050. We are serious to reach that target, but we are practical in doing so. What does it mean? When we look at reaching net zero, essentially is to decarbonize. We have 25 years to do so. We see it as 3 different challenges. One is carbon transition. The second is energy transition. The third is actually the economy transition. What do we mean by carbon transition? It's about making sure that industries, businesses correctly price the carbon in their business plan so that they know how much emission and how much it's going to cost them. And that's why we have set carbon tax, and we also articulated the carbon tax trajectory. That way, all the businesses in Singapore will start to take that into consideration. But that is not the only policy tool. We can't just leave industry to decarbonize on their own. It costs them to do so. So we take the carbon tax revenue that we have been collected to give back to the industry if they embark on decarbonization initiative. And that way, over time, they will reduce their carbon emission. And maybe the ideal situation is we collect zero carbon tax. But that's actually quite ironical for the tax people. Now, the second transition that we have to go through is the energy transition. Power generation accounts for 40% of our carbon emission. Industry is 50%, and then transport is about close to 10%. The rest are actually quite marginal. Today, our power generation is actually fueled by LNG, and we have to explore low carbon approaches like renewables as we transition and reduce the carbon emission for energy. But our island is so small, solar at most will account for 10%. We have no wind, we have no waterfall, and therefore hydro and wind is out. And then we have to rely on renewable imports, and we will have to explore other alternatives like ammonia, hydrogen, and maybe eventually nuclear if it's small enough to put a few on the island. So that's the energy transition side. The last part that we need to do is really the economic transition. And that means going into every single industries, how do you decarbonize? And that requires a series of regulations as well as incentives that will encourage businesses and industry to decarbonize. For example, ST Micro, when they built a new wafer fabrication plant, they put in place a district cooling system. And that is equivalent to taking out 100,000 cars from Singapore's road. And Singapore maybe will have about 600,000 cars in total. So we need incentives to be able to encourage companies to decarbonize existing operations as well as for new investment that come on stream. So actually, when we look at Singapore, if we want to move towards the decarbonization journey, first and foremost, we have to balance between trade-offs. How do you decarbonize without killing the industry and reducing the economic growth or actually forcing the economy to decline? While at the same time, if you don't decarbonize, the carbon emission will continue to go up, and then we are being irresponsible. But fortunately, I think the good thing is that most companies are also globally responsible. They are also embarking on the journey, and I think we can work together on this.
Thanks very much indeed. So let's dig into some more specific examples then. Anna, maybe come to you on this. In terms of what Shell's been doing, obviously you've had a wide range of different ventures, different projects and different low-carbon technologies. Which are the ones you think have been most successful and effective in terms of decarbonization of these hard-to-abate sectors?
Yeah, I always get the question, which one do you prefer and all of that.
Yeah, yeah.
I try to avoid. But look, we have a number of projects that we've invested on where we are operating today and offering to customers products. Like we operate 17 biogases plants. We have 6 waste oil plants. We have investments in first and second generation ethanol, and we are offering those to customers today. Only for the aviation sector, we are now present at 80 airports offering sustainable aviation fuels. For the marine sector, the same with gas and biogases. Now, when I look at projects from inception to the end, probably the one that I often mention is Northern Lights. And I would also want to touch on HH1 if we manage to squeeze it through. But Northern Lights is a really good example of what it takes. Because it did take strong government support, working with the industries and customers. The project to go from a pilot to scale is actually taken 10 years. And this is with a well-established technology, you can argue, which is the capture technology, and with an industry that is used to do upstream projects. So we have done the first phase of Northern Lights. This is done with Total and Equinor, support from the government to anchor customers to start with, Heidelberg Industries and Yara. And then the beauty of that is actually that now we have moved into phase 2, and we are looking now at tripling the capacity. And this is a fully commercial third-party business model where, again, we are not lowering our own emissions. It's really fully commercial. Now, it did take a long time. It did take the willingness of many people. I can tell you we've had so many ups and downs in the project. But I think this is one that I cite as collaboration, persistence, longer term, and scalability are very important. And really working between industry, governments, and customers. And I have to say, I do recognize the comments on the Singapore government. We've worked with you in the traditional businesses, industries, and the petrochemical industry, as well as now with the LNG and decarbonization of the aviation, the marine sectors. So I think it's really long-term, and everybody, all hands on deck.
Right. So Nadia, you mentioned a range of sectors, cement, steel, ammonia, hydrogen, CCUS. Without getting you to choose your favorite project, which are the ones you would say that are the most successful, the most promising at the moment?
So currently, I mean, we see a lot of traditional ammonia developments, right? Where I think the question from many ammonia producers is, how do I diversify so that I can also deliver blue ammonia and green ammonia? So this diversification challenge is something that the fertilizer industry is tackling with, which opens up for lots of opportunity. I think carbon capture is really an essential technology, so we see a lot of activities there. Methanol as well, both biomass gasification. It's not applicable in all regions and countries, obviously, but there are regions where there's a lot of interest of using biomass and gasifying that and then producing methanol, whether for SAF or for maritime, for shipping. So I believe SAF and maritime in general are really pull sectors right now that are moving ahead, although some delay, right? And also another technology which is very essential that we are developing is ammonia cracking. Because for us to be able to ship to Singapore, Japan, Korea, we need to be able to crack crack ammonia back to hydrogen. So this is important. We're building together with Uniper project in Germany, which will be a precursor for larger ammonia cracker that is intended to import 10 to 20% of the hydrogen supply to Germany. So I see that that will continue to increase. So yeah, I think still there is in all spaces delay, right? That there is still projects are happening, but there is still a lot of uncertainty in general. But all these, as Anna said, all technologies will go hand in hand. So there's no one-trick pony, but I think those projects where there is an intentionality of using infrastructure, of using indigenous capabilities, where the nature serves the purpose in a good way, where there is already a strong commitment from government and a long-term plan to develop the country or the region in a positive way. Considering, again, the equation, of course, always, and where there is this possibility of multitude of downstream chemicals in various forms. I think those projects are very interesting. I think those projects will also lead to scale, which then leads to improved economics also of the technology. They also encourage this innovation cycle in a very positive way. And digital solutions, of course, we see that as well. We see that we as a company need to develop more digital solutions for our existing customers, and that this becomes very integrated in the offering. And so therefore, all the digital development with AI will, of course, pull a lot of demand, but it's also part of how we design the future solutions.
So Scott, what's your perspective then? You talked about these grid-enhancing technologies, ways of getting more use out of the existing grid. Is that where you see the greatest promise in terms of decarbonizing power?
Yes and yes. Great potential there. But what we count on in Amazon and AWS is just innovation. And yes, there's a roadmap for all of these technologies that we're talking about. There's also innovative technologies that maybe we don't know about yet, or we are just now learning about, to help us optimize at the edge these energy systems. Baker Hughes' Lucipa, nobody was talking about that 4 years ago, and now it's optimizing production at the edge in real time, things of that nature. So we need to innovate, and we need the ecosystem to innovate. Let me give you a quick example that kind of blew me away, because it wasn't something that was on our dance card, right? You talk about hard-to-abate sectors, you talk about building materials. Let's talk about copper for a moment. Most people don't think about copper as a building material, because in normal buildings there's a modest amount of copper, but let me tell you, guess what? In data centers, there's a lot of copper. So there can be 10,000 to 30,000 tons of copper in a world-scale data center. We just innovated, along with Rio Tinto in the States, a new solution that Rio Tinto did, to give full credit, to leach copper out of very low-grade ore bodies or even waste material using bioagents, bioenzymes that they engineered along with one of their partners. And that is allowing us to create more concentrate for a lot less dollars, a lot faster, and better yield. So we have biology meets chemistry. We also optimize that leach pad in terms of concentration, chemical concentration, leach time, water flow. So biology meets chemistry meets AI and computing meets mining, all to deliver high-grade 99.99% copper at 60% less carbon intensity and 80% less water. So again, and that's at scale, by the way, at scale. So that's the kind of thing that wasn't really on our dance card 2 years ago or even a year ago. And these kinds of breakthroughs can happen if you bring the right constituents together, provide the right environment for innovation, and really build it out to scale. So now you've got copper being delivered that actually didn't even have to be mined because it was waste product, right? It didn't have to be shipped off the mine site because it was leached right there on the location. The leach agents are bio-friendly. And so it's a win-win-win-win-win. And we want more of that.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. I want to talk a little bit about scaling up, not just in the sense of getting from a pilot project to commercial scale, but also in terms of large-scale deployment. I mean, Anna, maybe start with you on this in terms of CCUS then. So you talk about Northern Lights being this successful project, definitely one you think has gone well. How do we get 1,000 Northern Lights projects all over the world?
I think probably the reality is we do need to give time for the learning curve and along the way. So I think hurrying projects or hurrying scale is not always the right thing to do. But I think having the right policies in place and policies that support the full value chain, from the supply, transport to customers, everybody needs to have means of being part of that solution. Sometimes looking at even innovative business models. For the aviation sector, we are using this blockchain technology called Avilia that we have piloted, where actually everybody in the value chain gets credits and pays for some of the carbon attributes. So I think stable policies that address the full value chain, collaboration across the value chain, and then making sure we learn from the projects we are doing. And I'm going to have a plug here on Holland Hydrogen 1. So for hydrogen projects, we have now 1 project in operations and 2 in construction. And one of them is Holland Hydrogen 1 with ThyssenKrupp. And we want to make sure that before we look even at the next phase of projects, we really need to have operated and understood how those that we have now work. And that allows us to build scale, bring costs down, and make it affordable. We have not mentioned that, but at the end of the day, customers expect all of us to deliver energy affordably.
Yeah. Chong-Boon, what's your perspective in terms of scaling up, getting to scale? Clearly, policy is crucial. How do you see that?
Well, I think firstly, I agree with what Anna mentioned. We actually learned a lot from Shell. How do we bring it to pilot and then commercial? Our sense is really that at the pilot phase, we need to not only work with the solutions provider, but also the customer, so that both are operating the pilot together, and the pilot is actually designed for eventual commercial deployment. And for example, when we talk about a SAF pilot plant, we do it on Jurong Island between Esther, which is the operator, as well as Etherfield, which is really the technology provider. Second is really that as you complete the pilot, you need to know how much does it take to scale up to commercial production. Sometimes you just need to have a kicker to bridge the gap because there's a risk involved for the first commercial production, and then the government has to decide whether how do I come in to bridge the gap. Sometimes we may not want to bridge the gap because it's really a commercial decision. So we have to make that decision, and the tools or the levers has to be available. Finally, in some of the areas, in Singapore, the government could be the first customer or the main customer. It could be waste treatment or waste to energy plant, water desalination plant, and increasingly, you're looking at decarbonization or CCS. And that's where we think that we can play our role as a first customer to get it going. But we must recognize that there's a significant risk involved and be prepared to take the risk. But at the same time, we also know that eventually it must be commercially viable. But we are prepared to be the first one to get it started. So there are different levers that we can help to bring the solution from lab to pilot to commercial production.
Thank you. So we're just about out of time, I'm afraid. Just very quickly, I wanted your thoughts then. Where are we going to be in 10 years on this? Where is decarbonisation going to be 10 years from now, if you look to the future? Anna, what do you think?
So possibly we won't talk about low carbon anymore, and it's about just having products that have a lower carbon intensity, and they are embedded in the offerings. I hope we have moved from pilots to scale on CCS, on hydrogen. We would have embedded biofuels and biogases in the value chains. We probably have a ton of more renewable energy for data centers. And then I think also we continue with looking at the next generation of technology that will have to be scaled post-2040, but well on track.
Chong-Boon, what do you think?
Well, we hope technology advances the way the technology owner predicts it to be. And the different initiatives that we make, whether it's import of renewables, decarbonization, CCS, will be able to proceed as we have planned. And hopefully by 2035, we will reach close to our NDCs with little impact on economic growth. I think that will be the ideal.
Yeah, certainly, that would be an achievement. Nadia, what do you think?
I'm optimistic, so I think that we will see some technological breakthroughs, which will be a result of cross-collaboration and the policies serving with creating this demand and incentives and long-term stability so that the investments can really go into clean tech. But if you look at how investments are going from region to region, there's a lot of money still being pulled into clean tech. And I think looking at the China plan, I think $1.5 trillion until 2030 suggests that there will be technological innovation that leads to a reduction also of the cost of the clean technology. And that's not, I'll just mention China now, because we will see the geopolitical impact of some regions, countries, and companies getting an edge that will serve them in the right way.
No, that's also a very important point, as you say. Scott, final thoughts.
We'll do our best to make the technologies continue to grow and innovate. My ambition is for all of these different value chains of energy, whether it's renewables, whether it's HVO or natural gas and so forth, they continue to be optimized. And I've said that a number of times, because another great way to decarbonize is to not just use different fuels, but to reduce the carbon intensity on a per barrel or per megawatt basis. And to do that, you have to optimize the physical systems.
Great point. Well, it's been fantastic talking to you. Unfortunately, we do have to leave it there, but thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.